Hello everyone, thank you for joining me today. I wanted to go over how to make this beautiful and simple holiday card inspired by Christina Werner and her 2019 holiday card series. It is a quick and easy one that I go to year after year, and it just comes out always so beautifully. The embellishments you can add and customize however you want. Silver, gold, the greeting can be different, the trees can be a different color, the sky can be a different color, and it's just so much fun to paint. Having the gradient, letting that dry, moving on to another one, almost assembly style. It's one of the most pleasurable cards to make. So I wanted to share it with all of you and let you know just how easy it is and how beautiful it would be to include in your holiday card repertoire. Alright, so for today's supplies, we're going to be working with some water, of course. I have my 2 jars of water just off screen. We are going to be using a gray blue for the sky and then a peachy pink for the, lower sky. And then also I'm going to use the same gray blue up here and a little darker version down here just to create some contrast for the gouache that we're going to put down later. We are going to use sepia mixed with neutral tint for the trees, piece of watercolor paper here, roughly 5 by 7. I have my size 2 Princeton Heritage round brush that I'll be using for the trees. And then I have a larger brush, any size 8 will do, for the gouache. And then also you are going to want a flat brush in order to create your gradient. This is a Princeton Heritage wash brush in 3/4 inch. So you want to begin by getting the first 2/3 of your paper wet, and this is what's going to create the gradient for the sky. So you want to be cognitive about where you're laying your water and even the transition that you're creating. It's nice to have it be kind of land looking, so not just straight across. It's okay to have it be higher in some sections and lower in the others, peaks and valleys, things like that. So now we're going to move on to the blue part of our sky, which is going to be, I'm using Indigo. You can use Payne's Gray, a mix of Indigo and Payne's Gray, but I'm just making sure to have it be very light, very diluted. And this Indigo is by Mungyo, and so will the Jaune Brilliant be as well, which will be our peachy pinky color fade gradient. And I'm just kind of moving it back and forth until I'm happy with it. I like it to be a little darker at the top, kind of more natural as what a sky would be. I'm going to rinse off my brush. I'm going to rinse it off really well because you don't want any of that blue mixing where you don't want it to. And sometimes with the Jaune Brilliant, it's really nice to mix it with the metallic. You can mix it with a copper or gold, and it doesn't create a super noticeable sparkle, but it does, it's there, which is nice for the artist. All right, so here we are. And you want to kind of encourage a natural blend, which I'm pretty happy with that. That's gonna dry a lot lighter. I like that. So I might come in just to play, and you can see it's already starting to mix and give me kind of more of a brown color, less of the peach, which happens. But I'm gonna come in here with a little bit more Indigo and make this just a little darker. All right, so we're gonna let that dry. All right, so our card is still a little bit wet, but it's dry enough for us to be able to put in a little dimension on the ground here where the trees are gonna go. So I just wanna lightly wet this, being kind of cognitive of the line that we've created there. I don't mind a little bit of bleed, but it is still wet, so it's gonna bleed more than you think. Okay, So now we're going to intentionally put in our hills, if you will, our sections where our trees are going to go. So I know I'm going to put some to this end over here, and then right here, this side, and then I'm going to create some here in the middle, in the foreground. Sometimes you get carried away like that. But so that's going to dry really faintly, and it'll give us a good template for where we're going to be able to put our trees and our snow. All right, we're going to let this dry and we'll come back to it. All right, so we are pretty much dry. It's still a little cool to the touch, but I think it'll be fine to move on. So I'm going to use one of the cards that I had made previously to create my scene to kind of mimic so I know where my trees go. Oh, and I'm using a watercolor pencil, and that way when I go to add in my trees it will just dissolve. But the color I'm using is so dark that you could use a regular pencil anyway. But if you went with a lighter color, then you'd want to use maybe a watercolor pencil or freehand. So I'm going to create a tall one here. See, and that's how you know your paper's a little too wet, when your pencil doesn't show through. And then maybe a smaller one here. I'm going to create some here in my foreground. Those might be a little too close together, but we can adjust that as we go. Two kind of medium-sized ones here, a larger one next to that, and another big one here at the end to kind of anchor it. And I do like them kind of compacted together so that the scene is more intense. So the tree color I'm using today is a mixture of Windsor Newton sepia and neutral tint. The one I'm using is by Jackson, but you can use, obviously any colors you want. As I mentioned earlier, you can do greens, any color. You can do this. This would be awesome as what I think of as neon. The colors be very brilliant and unusual and unexpected. A bright purple sky that fades into a pink with a really deep blue here, and then green trees. That would be great. You could even put, instead of snow, you could put little baubles on them. It really is up to you, and that's why I love this card. Once you get the pattern and everything down, then the details can vary and you can make totally different cards each time. Okay, so we're gonna start here with our tree. So you start with a straight line, somewhat. Easier said than done. And I have a tutorial on quick and easy ways to do these trees, but I'm just gonna buzz through these. By creating this zigzag motion here, you're kind of giving the tree body, and then you just come back in with your downward strokes to mimic branches, and this gives it the shape. And sometimes they don't always look like you intended, but that's the beauty of nature. And it's pretty exciting to have things that come out different than you expected, because that might relate to someone more, which is what art is all about. I like to try and do as much as I can here on the horizon, just to kind of cover up where the lines meet. Feel free to move your paper whichever angle you need. Obviously, I like to do mine at an angle. Easier for me. When I come back in with my detail, it's almost like a stippling. And see, some of them are more sparse than others, and that will add a nice effect with the snow. So we'll just keep adding in our trees. My simple and easy tree tutorial are these exact trees. It goes into a little more detail. I've already created a bunch of these cards and they're all different. But one thing I've noticed is that I really like this darker color against the light colors of the sky and the snow. Really pops and stands out. But for these trees, I find it's the easiest to just start small and add your detail to the ends, to the tips of the branches. Alright, so before I add my snow, I want to kind of take care of some of these pencil lines, watercolor pencil lines. Alright, so I'm going to be using Windsor Newton gouache white, permanent white. Could probably use bleed-proof white, but you want to use the gouache because it's more opaque and it actually has some texture to it, so it creates a beautiful dimension as well for the card. Good amount of water in here just to make it easy to apply, and I don't want to have too much on the tip of my brush when I begin because I'm going to start at the top, and although I tend to think it's going to be heaviest at the top because that's where it first falls. I don't know if that's accurate, but that's how I do it. So I do kind of blob it on at the beginning. And then I just take with a light hand what I would think would be the top of the branches. And to me, what you want to avoid is this, where there's nothing in the middle and it's all on the ends of the branches. So I just kind of come back through and just stipple, make some bigger blobs and just make it look kind of random, like how I did the branches. Just stippling, but at the same time creating that downward motion to mimic the branches. Can go light in some places, or if you wanted to just do a light snow effect, you don't have to do this much if you don't want to. But I like the contrast. To me, this is just so relaxing. It's just repetitive, but yet you're focused on making sure that, you're making it look realistic or somewhat realistic, but you can kind of zone out and appreciate it. And even though the gouache is opaque, you can see how light it dries. So it really, to me, it doesn't distract from the tree, it adds to it. And where we didn't have much dimension, like right here, we can create that with our white. Then I take this thicker part that I have here, and a little bit more water, but still have a pretty thick consistency. And this is where I create my mounds. And I like to do it kind of like true mounds where they go up and down. And then I just kind of dry brush, take it out like this, which creates some beautiful texture and patterns. I like to do it up here too, just to kind of hide that transition a little bit more. I don't live in a snowy area, so I don't really know a realistic snow situation other than what I see in pictures. So now I'm going to take my larger, it's my size 8. Just use what I have left over and just kind of work more of the scenes in. And this probably will need another layer. We'll let it dry and I'll show it to you, but. Okay, so our gouache has dried and I like how that looks. I don't think I'm going to add anything else, but if you wanted to add a little bit more texture, you could do it right up in here, wherever you think is realistic or unrealistic, or however you want to make it look. Don't forget to sign your work. I didn't do that when I started, and it's nice to just come up with a signature to have, and it adds a pretty something to it and a pride that you deserve. So that is our tutorial today. We can also add a border if you want. The example I gave earlier had a border. Let's take this off. This is the best part. All right, so you can adhere this to your card front just as is. I'm going to trim mine down and add some silver embossing powder. You can see here, if you don't have embossing powder, then don't worry about it. Use a darker blue like we did here around the edge. You can use ink around the sides to frame it. You don't have to frame it at all. You can cut it down a little smaller on the sides and put a beautiful peachy piece of paper behind it to mat it like that to frame up. Anything you want, it's up to you. The sentiment in here, my client has chosen Happy Holidays, so we put that right up in here. You can put it anywhere. It can be any sentiment you want. You can handwrite it, you can leave it without. That's the beauty of this card and why I love it so much, is that it can be a different card each time you paint it. And in fact, it is. So anyway, until next time, thank you for tuning in.